afternoon. I'm Dan Callis, and we are here with artist Tom Tsuchiya. Tom is a Cincinnati-based artist who specializes in public sculpture and has recently completed a commission at Biola University. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Dan.
I'm wondering if you might open today with giving us a bit of your history, your education, your apprenticeship. Let us know who you are.
Okay. Well, I was born and raised in Cincinnati. My parents came over from Japan, and me and my twin brother and younger brother were raised there. And I went to school. A lot of my education was in Cincinnati. I went to a University of Cincinnati and majored in classical civilization, basically focusing on Greek and Latin and a lot of the Greek and Roman cultures, including a lot of their art and archaeology, which I had a fascination with. Simultaneously, I apprenticeshiped with a notable sculptor in the Cincinnati area named Richard J. Miller. He became my main mentor for many, many years. And he taught me a lot about the design and the craftsmanship and much as virtually everything about sculpture. And so he really was like my main source of information regarding to a lot of my philosophy of sculptures. And then some of my other knowledge came from the University of Cincinnati with my study of the classics. And because of my faith, I had an interest in reading the New Testament and analyzing it in the original text. So I took a little bit of Greek, and some of my friends and I were reading some of the early Koine passages, and then that helped me better appreciate. So that aspect, some of my spiritual aspect came from University of Cincinnati, and then my artistic I learned from the apprenticeship.
Okay, so all your technical and formal training was from the actual apprenticeship.
Yes, that is correct.
Wonderful.
And at the same time, I think, once I started working professionally as a sculptor, this would have been in the 1990s. And then it was like I learned, I guess what they call the school of hard knocks. I learned it just by doing out in the field, and learned and met a lot of the other artists, a lot of the other like fabricators, various types, and learned a lot about making sculptures using newer materials and things in addition to what I learned from my mentor. Mm-hmm. So that would have been include things like working with LEDs, working with fiberglass, in addition to clay and bronze. So.
Do you have certain materials that you find you really prefer?
Yeah, I have to say I love challenges. So. Yeah. Even though I was trained primarily working with clays and plasters and things like that, but I really enjoy working on something completely almost random. One sculpture I made for an art gallery, I had a theme of dealing with the temporary nature of things. I sculpted out of ice, so this piece was designed to transform throughout the exhibit. And another material was a little bit unusual. Was after I produce a lot of my sculptures that are made of clay, steel, wood, and foam, I have a lot of extra material. And one day I actually collected a lot of my extra material and then put together a new sculpture from that. So it's all these. And it was a piece called Atlas Recycled. It's basically a form that, as the title implies, is an image of like an atlas holding the earth up, and it's made of foam, wood, and steel scraps. And and then the outer surface was from old maps and atlases, and including like AAA and National Geo. And kind of like the sculpture there at Biola, it actually doubles as it was like a receptacle for, in this case, recycled materials, paper, plastics, wood. And he has toured different cities. He's kind of like the Travelocity gnome. He's been exhibited in New York City, to Washington, D.C., and he's probably going to go to Paris next year at some point. So I enjoy working, like I said, all kinds of anything materials. I've never worked with stone or wood, ironically, even though those are what we think of, people think of sculpture. A lot of times people think stone, but I've never actually worked with those. So.
Now, I understand that the majority of your practice is public sculpture,
yes.
Public commission sculpture. How did you come to practice that kind of sculpture? What drew you to it?
It's interesting because I had when I was a kid, I always had a fascination with classical art. And a lot of that work that we're familiar with were all public sculptures. You know, we think of the Parthenon and, you know, and all the artwork on the Parthenon and including a number of the sculptures that we hear about are no longer around, like the big sculptures of like Athena and Athens and of Zeus and Olympia. And then, of course, you see just all the fragments and all the, like the Roman copies of, you know, a lot of what have been famous, you know, works by the Greeks and Romans. Also, at the same time, I had a big fascination with Frank Lloyd Wright, you know, and growing up, he's always my favorite architect. And you know, I've always admired his buildings, which are really in many ways very sculptural, you know, and I kind of think of his buildings not only just being buildings, but they're really giant sculptures, you know, and you know, my favorite has always been the Guggenheim in New York, and had the good fortune to visit, like say, Falling Water in Pennsylvania, and a bunch of them in near Chicago, where, you know, it's about 4.5 hours away from Cincinnati. So I think that had a lot. I was kind of drawn to this sort of creating this sculpture that it really, that you can create that can have a dialogue with a lot of people in the community. And I think that was the thing. So first I liked just in it intrinsically in itself, but I think it's neat that it can have this, it's something you can kind of share with the community and interact, the people in the community can interact with the artwork. It's always intrigued me.
And it's a very different practice than the traditional sculptor who might work in the studio, create an individual work of personal inspiration,
that is
then put it out for public interaction.
That is correct. Yeah, in this case, it's a case where yes, you have a lot of time typically what we say of a client, or which could be a university, or you know, like a company or a private, you know, donor, or, you know, a ballpark and things like that, and they'll come to you and say, you know, we'd like to have a work here, and, you know, do you have ideas and things like that, and or in some cases more specific, you know, things. So yes, it's a very different kind of dynamic, you know, and but I've noticed that there's at the same time a lot of room for personal expression, and in the case of with Biola, this is one of my favorite pieces, you know, that I've done here, the Spirit of Christ, because it was in perfect harmony with my own personal expression, my relationship with Jesus and my faith, and at the same time, well, making public sculptures, you know, and over the years, you know, I guess been doing it for about 20 years or so now, you know, so it was just sort of everything kind of comes together, and then the freedom, you know, of just doing what you know I wanted to do, but then again. As we mentioned earlier about the limitations, you know, I think for me, if I just said, hey, you know, you got a blank, you know, slate and just come up with something, it's really hard to be creative. And for me, these limitations are what helps me and be creative. So working with public art and that kind of a context, this kind of subject, it actually helps me narrow things down, you know, and you know, and again, and we can talk a little more later about the Biola example, and this is. It's a perfect example of that. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Are there times where it can be challenging or difficult working with a committee or an organization?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You are. It certainly does. I've been very fortunate up to this point that a lot of people have a lot of respected my views and my philosophies. So when I work with them, they're not like, you have to do this, you got to do this, you got to change this, you got to do this, and you know, we don't like your vision, you got to do something completely different or anything like that. It's been very, I was at a very supportive experience. You know, it's always, and I'm always open to, you know, for ideas from all sorts of people, and of course I certainly, you know, respect the opinions of most of my fellow members in the art community the most, of course. However, sometimes the general public, they come up with something that is a very good idea, or if they see something that they can't pinpoint, it's like, well, this could be a little bit modified. This, and I don't know what to say or do about it. You know, and they kind of throw things out. So from experience, it's been a lot like that. And then I think part of it is, I think it's the way you present yourself as well. If some people if you just say, "Oh, I'll do whatever, master," whatever, and you kind of, people start thinking you're that kind of person, where you're pandering, then they start treating you like that and say, like, well, you're just going to be someone who's going to execute whatever our visions at our committee or whatever. If you present and if you really do generally care about creating something good, then you're like, no, I have a certain vision and we're going to make it happen. And again, with Biola, it's again wonderful working with you, Dan, and the art department, because I had a certain vision in mind, but then you're going to say, no, we're going to totally scrap that. We're going to do something different. It's like, no, we're going to improve it. We're going to make it better. There are flaws I thought in the original design, which were completely ironed out, thanks to your help. And the department, just suggested things, and like the tail area and design arrangement, things like that. So that's from my experience, yes, with the public. Yes, it's been good. It's been good so far. Yes, so far. Yes, thank God, thank the Lord.
There's always tomorrow.
There's always tomorrow. That's right.
So, a year ago, you received a letter, actually from me, that introduced our proposal.
Yes.
The invitation to participate in a competition. The university had been approached by John and Marilyn Long of the Long Family Foundation, and they had generously offered to fund the commissioning of a public sculpture. They were very gracious in giving kind of latitude to the university and asked us to come up with a theme. Their desires, of course, that it would be aesthetically pleasing, that it would give glory to God. But everything else was open-ended for the university. So the Public Arts Committee created a theme, and that was to create a non-figurative, abstract sculpture for exterior viewing that were based on the words or actions of Christ in the Gospels. We invited numerous artists from around the world, from around the country, put together a list of accomplished professional sculptors and invited those artists to submit something in a 90-day submission proposal. After that, we narrowed that down to a final 4 and then selected one. And yours, of course, was the one that was selected.
Yes.
Wondering if you could tell us the story from kind of conception, from the first set of drawings, or maybe even before the drawings happened. How you began to imagine that proposal, and then take us all the way through to completion.
Okay. Yes, actually, and I'm glad you mentioned about talking about even before this particular competition, maybe before, let's say, September 2013, is because actually for years, I always been there's a part of me that was struggling because I wanted to create a sculpture for myself that really I felt captured, again, the spirit of Christ, something that really reflected my faith, something that kind of like really tied. And then and there's always been a challenge. There was something that was kind of lurking back into my brain. And then I knew why I couldn't come up with something until Biola, before you sent me the email, and then Marilyn Long contacted me. Is again, we're talking about these limitations, you see. And then, before it was just anything under the sun, anything. It was just hard to focus. And then with this particular project, and again, with you mentioning the themes, and then, of course, the location is going to be in front of the Virginia and Earl Green Gallery. And then working with a certain budget that was all clear, everything's laid out, that I was able to narrow. Then finally, I was able to focus and then come up with an idea. So this is, it started off first, looking at, well, first of all, my relationship with Jesus Christ, known since we were, as a child, and is the part of who I am. And that was, in some ways, like the easiest part, because I've been thinking about it for a while. And there's a passage that was initially influenced me on this sculpture, and that was the first epistle of John 3:18, where he said, "Let us love not in word or talk, but in effort and in truth." And I really love that because that really sums up really Christ's intentions, his kind of message. That's what, and then I thought, okay, well, I thought you need to make a sculpture, and then here it is. I'm kind of nearing a sculpture that doesn't just have the theme of Christ, but actually kind of helps carry on Christ's message.
It has an action of Christ.
That's right. And I thought, oh, well,
Interesting.
I'm going to make it as something that can, double as, like a receptacle for, canned goods that can help feed the needy. And of course, there I was very familiar, of course, the story of the feeding of the 5,000 when Jesus, performed the miracle of getting the 2 fish and 5 loaves, and the rest of the story. So it's from there I said, okay, I got that part, and then the next thing was working with the building itself, knowing where it was going to go. I can see the scale, the photographs you gave me and the plans and things like that. I was able to figure out, what kind of size, of sculpture would fit best in there, what kind of shape, and firstly, with the building being brick, and then even being sort of like a square, angular-looking building. Then I thought, it'd be neat from street view. The sculpture could almost maybe mirror that brick quality, and then so you can kind of see one of this little model here, just kind of from the side view, almost has like a brick, kind of like a pattern to it, so to speak. And at the same time, the building, I remember, of course, had the metal lettering and the door frames, and I thought, wow, stainless steel, aluminum, those are very beautiful materials, and that silver color. And then going with the budget, the generosity of the long family foundation, I was like, I could make this into a very fine stainless steel. It should be very strong and it'd be durable and last forever and look beautiful.
So if I may,
yeah.
As you begin to conceive it, you're thinking about your own personal relationship with Christ, and then embedding that into a work. And you didn't just want that work to illustrate or image the message of Christ, but to act it out, to be in action. And you mentioned like a food receptacle, a food container.
That's right, container.
And then you wanted to make it responsive to the site.
That's right.
What comes to mind for me immediately is, particularly in the 20th century tradition of art, the role of art is to be an aesthetic object, an object of contemplation.
Yes.
Not necessarily a functional object.
Functional,
right?
yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Utilitarian object.
Yes.
So I'm fascinated by the idea of you as an artist wrestling with that problem of creating a beautiful aesthetic object and something that functions, and as you're beginning to imagine it, a receptacle, something that will receive, then offer it back out.
Yes.
So, how did you begin to solve that problem?
Yeah, I think I kind of been fascinated with I was trying to think of just all the variety of ways we can create art, and art, I feel, can be almost anything if it's designed and it's beautifully. And then so with that, I thought, well, specifically, it could be almost like I think, as I mentioned earlier in some of the other presentations, about it being kind of like a performance art piece. So in this case, because it is a university, and we have the students, and with Biola, where they instruct and they develop a lot of their, you can say, habits and knowledge, and ways to celebrate Christ. And so here I thought, this is a way where we can have these, when the panels are removed, and then it becomes like a shelf, and then the students can bring in the cans and put them in there, and they must create almost an artwork of their own, kind of modify the piece itself, and create almost all these kinds of myriad of colors and things
from the labels of
the labels, yes,
the donated food.
Yes, that's right. And of course, we've been talking about the whole theme of Andy Warhol. So you get the good old Campbell soup can, and then now, so people.
I've said that Andy Warhol took the soup out of the can and just gave us the label.
Did.
Now you're offering it back full of soup.
Yes, there you go. That's right. Yes,
It's a wonderful turn of events.
Yeah, that's right. A little, flip thing. So yeah, so that's kind of what I was. And there's, again, going back again, my again, I was looked at Louis Sullivan and Frank Lloyd Wright as, again, American architects of the 20th century and I was held them in high esteem, as architects. And again, with buildings and stuff, is a form that is functional, even though it is to be seen as, in their cases, their works are very, I felt, very sculptural, like a fine work of art, but it just had these other qualities. And there's something that always intrigued me. I really, I think it was, I just found it really intriguing. And I thought, wow, I sort of incorporated a lot of that, maybe perhaps that spirit in my work, so.
You mentioned the story of Christ feeding the masses from the
Yes.
Sermon on the Mount, the feeding the 5,000. How did that begin to inform the design, the conception of the sculpture?
Yes, it happened as once I reread I guess it was, in this case, both Matthew and John had and a couple of those, some of the passages about that. I kind of went in there back again recently and read everything carefully. And then from there, I thought, okay, well, I thought I could do something with 2 fish or 5 loaves, maybe work on those themes. But then
Those numbers,
and
those
5
forms.
and 2 and those forms,
Okay.
yeah. But then I thought, well, there's the 12 disciples, and I remember they filled on the baskets. And I thought, oh, well, this might be kind of interesting to have 12 forms, and then so that's I kind of transformed there. So each of the 12 cylindrical forms, the elements are represented all of the baskets, and then from there, I thought, since we're almost on this theme of with fish and loaves, then I thought, oh wait, of course, Jesus is associated with the ichthus, with the fish, the acronym, Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. And I thought, well, maybe I can arrange these cylindrical forms in a manner so they form the body of a fish, and then add a tail fin kind of a form perhaps that can kind of complete that image. So it just sort of kind of happened that way. And I thought, well, makes it more interesting than instead of I just had these sort of cylinder forms just sort of kind of lying around, but if they're kind of arranged in a lyrical manner in some way, it makes it interesting and added that. So that's kind of how that evolved.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So you've problem solved it. You're imagining it. How does it move from your imagination and the drawing into what we now have as the 6 foot by 12 foot stainless steel sculpture?
Oh, yeah.
So how does it go from drawing to
Oh, that's right.
its
Yes.
present
Yes.
form?
Yeah. So from the very beginning, the first things I usually do is I just have like a pen and paper, and I just sketch out ideas really quick. And then what I do is I proceed next to working with my 3D software on the computer, which is basically, I should say, the 3D software equivalent of, like, say, your regular Word, processing, programs that we have nowadays. We have a lot of flexibility to create these different, shapes and forms and move things around. It's like moving a paragraph here, cutting that out, or adding this sentence or other things like that. So, but of course with forms. And again, since typically I like to make it, again, being involved in the whole field of public sculpture, of course, these sculptures is it something where we know where this sculpture is going to be typically located and where it's going to be where it's going to be installed ahead of time. So knowing that, then I constructed the scale model of the campus in the 3D virtual program, so to begin with, and then I would start creating these little shapes and things like that, and then turning it around and looking at different angles and and then decide, well, how big, how small this should be, things of that nature, all the relationships. And then from there, then once I arrive at the general design, then I produced a series of, stills of the design. And then this is where I shared it with you, Dan, in the art department. And then so you can see, like, well, what about this idea? What about this? How's this looking? And then that's where we had this really great dialogue. We're going back and forth, talking via email. And so, like, well, that tail is good. And I know initially, we had this script, the John 318 on there. And I thought, wow, that seems a little like, maybe heavy-handed or, kind of clumsy in certain ways. And then again, I know you're not against text or any of the scriptures, that gets into an inside joke there, but that you mentioned, of course, the library nearby had a lot of the words and from the scriptures, which I had the good chance to visit, and then you felt, okay, they had a certain theme there with a lot of the text, and then said, well, maybe for this piece you want to break away from that, so, and because it's all, especially in front of visual arts gallery, well, maybe focus on the forms and the shapes, and I thought, oh yeah, that's nice, and then. And it was something always kind of bugged me about having something that was so heavy-handed with just the text real bold, and then I thought it'll be too much, So, and I think I thought, oh, that makes more sense, if we maybe can incorporate the text in a manner that's more subtle or something of that sort.
And the fact that you've embedded the text, you've embedded scripture
Yeah.
into all the elements of the work. And
Yes.
that those are all there to be discovered
That's
by
right, exactly.
a considered viewer.
That's right,
Yeah.
yes.
So it's the word kind of embodied.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
And then from there, after we were able to resolve a lot of some of the refinement, then I just produced this scale model here just out of paper based on my other digital forms. And even though with all the technology that we have today, there's something I've noticed that working in 3D physically with this thing, I can look around and like this. In some ways, it's easy to kind of tweak things, kind of move this, adjust this or that. And the computer I don't feel like it's as easy. You can get the general designs and then, get it into position here, but to then move it here a little bit or move this a little bit here, or move just a little bit, it's the finessing. It's easy to do this. So I did this. And then from there, we had this digitally scanned using a laser scanner into another software where we were able to create essentially like a GPS, a 3D GPS, so that way, when we produce the full scale in stainless steel, we know where all these elements were related to each other, so we can kind of pinpoint things, and that's how we were able to produce like little maps in my computer, and then there was a company called Advanced Welding in North of where I live, where they specialize in stainless steel, what they call sculptures, a lot by other artists. And in fact, I was recommended by them by another sculptor who worked in stainless steel. I said, oh, these guys are great. And they work with a variety of materials, aluminum. One of the main things was stainless steel. They use a lot of it's hand done, but it's also using some water jet equipment and things like that. This particular sculpture here, then they created, I think, the general oval form using like a water jet, but everything else is all handmade. Everything was just constructed by hand. And so actually each of the panel doors are custom for each of the cylinders, and because they're just slight movement and changes, real subtle ones. And while we're doing that, I thought, well, that might be a problem. How do we can get mixed up some of these, doors, these panels. So I thought, well, after all, each of these 12 elements represent a basket of one of the disciples. I thought, well, why don't we put their names inside? They could become so. And it was kind of like perhaps a serendipitous situation there. I did not plan that initially, and it ended up being something really nice because also when I worked with a collaborative structure engineer who made sure that it can take the weight of what goes inside and also just its own weight, and that we needed, say, structures. We need these vertical pieces, elements in here, columns to support the piece. Just by themselves, I didn't like the looks of them. So I thought, well, this is a case where we put the names of each of the disciples in between. So this one, I think it was like James, and then we put the names, and then it sort of tied it together, pulled it, and made it kind of aesthetically pleasing. Because my intention, of course, is, well, this is fine art. This is it's not just a cabinet or like a shelf, it's more than that.
So even in taking off the panels, for those times of the year when we do the food dries, and it transforms from a clean aesthetic object to this kind of functioning object, and the panels come off, it suddenly discloses another layer of interpretation, because then it reveals the disciples' names.
Yes, that is correct. And then I figured then it sort of it starts the other sides, the functional and the performance side, and I guess one I should kind of backtrack when I was still designing the piece. I happened to be temporarily living in Rhode Island, and I decided the size of the opening based on the cabinet in my apartment that I was staying in. I opened up and I measured, like, oh, that'd be good. I could stack 3 of these 10 cans. So I think that would work. And I thought that was rather amusing. So that's how I came up on that. But yes, and then what I think is neat is, again, this sculpture is then transformed into something else. And then I feel it is something which, again, so appropriate and makes so much sense for Biola with their whole theme of, instructing the young men and women to do God's work in various ways. And well, here's one of the various ways.
Yeah.
So it ties, and I thought that's something that was very important to me. And again, going back to the original point, I thought the sculpture has to be something, again, that is just talk about Christ's message. It carries on as actions.
Yeah. So, and at so many levels.
Yes.
Because when we think of that action, the first action is that one of giving, and both someone giving of the food to the form, and then the distribution out from there. But I also think of the giving of you, the artist, to our community.
Yes.
And then the giving of each viewer's time to stop and contemplate it as an object of beauty.
Yes.
All right? That reflective time is.
Yes.
It is a doing time. It's an action of the kingdom.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
we are called in Philippians to think upon that which is true and good and beautiful.
Oh, that's yeah.
One of the things now, one more thing on our campus that is worthy of contemplation is
Yes. Oh, yeah.
the object of beauty that you've created.
Yes. Thank you.
So the last time you saw it, it was in a warehouse in Cincinnati.
Yes, that's right. Yes, that's right.
It comes out to California before you. It gets
Yes.
put up. Today, we unveiled it to the public. You see it in its complete in its complete form. You had worked from photographs. You'd worked from site visits.
Yes.
But to actually see it, it finished in its location. What was that like today?
Oh, it was so it was just exhilarating, because it's so neat to see something that you've been working on, first of all, for close to a year, and had a certain vision in mind, and to see it in fruition, in its completion, in its context, is just amazing. And because it really was interesting, it was kind of like what I imagined, and it was like, that was my vision. It's like, it worked.
Were there surprises?
I guess surprises, I think the neat thing about the surprises was it kind of like you say, a good surprise, you could say, is that because no matter how much you can plan things and look at things, you just don't know, like, is it going to work or whatever, and then, but what I really loved was just I think I remember you and when we worked with the landscape architect, and you guys decided, like, let's put this sculpture in this arrangement here, like this, where the form flows to the doors of the gallery, and I thought, oh yeah, that's really neat. But then you don't really know exactly how it's going to work in context. And I remember walking around, the building all around. It's like, oh, this is beautiful. This works. The whole thing just moves, in that direction there, and that was a neat surprise. And then walking from the other direction, from say from the art department, and heading, from the library area, and then heading, I guess, towards the gallery. And then you see the sculpture, and you see the neat shapes. And then I remember you can kind of see in this kind of angle like this from your perspective, and seeing this pattern, this sort of rhythm of this, this step going up and this pattern, and it was just really, it's like, oh, that looks really great, and then and there's something about it that was sort of dynamism, but it was just calm and peaceful looking, and just something that, like I said, something you can contemplate, and it's just, oh, it was great. And then the lighting, and then even though I studied about where the lighting was coming from, knowing where north was, west, and east, and the different where the sun's really, but you don't really know until everything's done. And I thought that light was very beautiful, and it went in there, just to see how the light just changes and moves on it. In fact, actually, while we were doing some of the installation of the light on the previous day, I saw it kind of near the before or just right after sunrise, and there was a kind of a neat glow of everything, and it was just a neat, it gives it a whole different look, and it's beautiful. So yeah, go on and talk. Yeah, so it was so very, very so happy. So yes,
Good.
yes.
Well, what's next for you? I understand that you're currently working on a proposal for a state building.
Yes,
Could you just share a bit about that before we close?
yes. I'm actually been very fortunate that I'm one of the, I guess they call it semifinalists or finalists for the Statuary Hall for the U.S. Capitol in D.C. As you know, every state has two sculptures representing the state, and usually a prominent member from that state. And Ohio, and in fact, I didn't really know this myself before getting on into the project. Thomas Edison was born in Ohio. I always think of Thomas Edison associated with New Jersey, with Menlo Park and all that. But he was born in a little town called Milan, Ohio, up in near south of Cleveland area. And anyway, his sculpture is going to be replacing another sculpture at the U.S. Capitol, because the other gentleman's named Allen, but I think they said, well, he's sort of fallen out of favor because I think he was promoting slavery or something of that sort. So they're going to be replacing the sculpture of Edison with Allen. And then, so I've been very fortunate that my proposals so far, my designs have been accepted into as one of the semifinalists or finalists for this project. And so it'll be a fantastic and design, and yeah, it's very, very just hoping things work out, and again, similar to this project, I felt again it was right down my path, of doing public work, and it had a certain narrow, we knew where it was going to go, we knew this, we knew a lot of the information, and it helped me being very creative. So I think that's enabled to get to where I was. So.
Well, the Lord's blessing on you in that project.
And absolutely, yeah. And of course, yes. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
We anxiously will await to hear how that goes.
Yes.
Right? And bless you for the gift you've given us at the university.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much there, Dan. And again, to you and Marilyn Long, and of course, Christ. And I think, he answered what I was looking for a number of years, and I think it all works. It all this happens. It all works together with it. So, thank you.
Right. Thank you.